Hey everybody, this is Perch. Okay, a lot of you are going to disagree with my take on this email, and that's fine. All right, you know what? Who knows? Let's just get into it and see. Um, but I think the thing that struck me and what I wanted to kind of talk to you about today is how outrage ages. Okay, so you get various forms of outrage. I was looking at some. I stumbled across an old folder of some memes I made back in 2017. 2017, yeah. So basically, about 7 years ago, in comics, and I was responding to some of the outrage that was going on at the time, on both sides, by the way, on the those mean comic fans and those mean comic creators side. So both ends. I was looking at some of the memes I created, and what I was struck by is like how not how badly they age, but how irrelevant they aged. Like there was a bunch of things that people were really pissed at that just doesn't matter. Like it's interesting. You remember that you've seen that picture of the Batgirl, the tub in front of the door, and who knows what the fuck was going on there. I still maintain to this day that the artist was doing it to take the piss out. This is an artist who does not care, is irritated. Maybe they got going with it and they drew the bathtub and started to draw the door. Like shit, a door can't go here. And they're like, you know what? I'm being paid $100 a page. Fuck it, the door's going here. That's what I think happened. Quite frankly, I absolutely believe it. But who knows? Maybe it's just but that one still comes up. Like I'll see that posted, or people email me this panel. Like, have you ever seen this? Yes, I have. Yes, I've seen it continuously for a long time. And so that one, that outrage. I don't know if that was an outrage, but that moment, that meme, has lived on. It's been it's been discussed and kicked around for quite some time. Meanwhile, other things have kind of faded into memory. Like once upon a time, there's this guy, Max Bemis, and he was writing Moon Knight, and then he named one of the characters, the villain character, Ernst. And it seemed at the time a pretty clear shot at Doug Ernst because of a variety of things. But Ernst isn't the most common name, but still could be just a coincidence, except Bemis was feuding with Ernst at the time on Twitter before the character appeared. The character was written kind of douchey, as I recall. The character even mildly resembled Doug Ernst. There was a few things, but so that one though nobody talks about and remembers. I'm curious, even if the people listening here, you're like, oh yeah, and even that one was one of the more I don't know, relevant ones, or one of the ones people remembered more than some of the other stuff. So it's interesting just how stuff ages, and some of the stuff that we get really wound up about as being obnoxious, let's say woke takes on things. You watch the thing like years later, and you're like, no, maybe. I don't know. I mean, like for example, The Last of Us 2 featured kind of in my opinion, a bait and switch where one of the main characters, or the main character of The Last of Us, was in some trailers and everything else leading up to the game, and then you get to the game and the character is basically murdered quick and early in the game, and it's a lot more about the other character, and she's a lesbian. There's a trans character there, and so it's like that one is a thing that was done that seemed very clearly to make a social statement. I still think it's a weird social statement. Like we're gonna put a trans character into the game. We're gonna have that character be a horrible murderer, but hey, trans rights. Am I right? Anyway, but that one is a clear case of it. It kind of, I don't want to say wrecked the game, but yeah, to some extent it wrecked the game, and it definitely created a cloud. I mean, whether you're pro or con of that whole thing, it created a cloud over the game. Now the game still sold really well because The Last of Us was a huge hit for Sony, and people buy the sequel, and it turns out not everybody lives on Twitter. But it's still, if you're a game maker, you want the sales, but you don't want this baggage with those sales. But other things like movies, I remember when everyone was super pissed off about She-Ra, and then She-Ra, the character, and they were gonna make it more inclusive, and like I think you had a fat one and you had a you had a non-white one, and and then they were both lesbians. Or I mean, you just had some other things in it, and you had a bunch of like grown men like getting really pissed off about She-Ra, and this went on for months at a time about how angry people were. But today, She-Ra's still up there on Netflix. I mean, you could see it, and it's like, I don't know, is anybody still complaining about this? And do people feel kind of funny complaining about it? Like you're complaining about She-Ra. You're a grown adult male, and you're complaining about She-Ra. And I think and people are like, this was one of my favorite characters. Really? Really? This 42-year-old man with a beard, She-Ra, was like your favorite character. I just maybe. Okay, but I don't know. It seems hard to believe. I'll just say it. And so these controversies too age weird. And as an example of one of them, um, I recently watched. I took on a plane. Scott Pilgrim Takes Off, and it was it was a Brian O'Malley more or less helmed or involved or paid one of those Netflix series where they basically took a lot of the same, I think all by and large, or the vast majority of the actors from the Scott Pilgrim live action movie. They used their voices. They did it. They did an animated movie, really in the style of the original Scott Pilgrim graphic novel. The Scott Pilgrim graphic novel and the live action movie mostly followed each other. They were close. And then the cartoon came out. The new Netflix one came out. And again, I'm about to do spoilers here, but it's been out for quite a long time, so I hope that's okay. I mean, it should be okay. But in this new version, they kill Scott Pilgrim, or they make it look like he's killed. It turns out he's just been kind of kidnapped, but they make it look like he's killed, and it was a twist because they were kind of following along with the movie and with the book, and you're probably thinking like, why are we doing this story again? I guess we're just doing an animated version, so it's closer to the original comic, and that's what we're getting. Okay, I don't know exactly why we need this, but sure. And then you get to the end of the first episode, and they're like, "Whoops! Surprise! We killed him." Then everything from that point on is different. It's the world in which Patel murdered Scott Pilgrim versus Scott Pilgrim winning that first fight against Ramona's evil exes. And at that, there was a lot of outrage. And I watched that first episode and I watched the ending. I remember being like, this is bullshit. Because it felt to me like a bait and switch. It felt like, it's like, hey, we're going to do I mean, it's in the title. Hey, it's Scott Pilgrim. And then you like look at the title closer. It's like, oh, it's Scott Pilgrim Takes Off. And it's like, he took off, meaning he's not in it anymore. It's really about Ramona and about all these other characters. That's what I was led to believe. So I watched that first episode. I'm like, yeah, I don't need to see this. I don't. And I was really, and I still dislike the idea of we defied your expectations. And that's a lot of what this felt like. It felt like, haha, you thought you were getting one thing, that we screwed you. And so I'm like, I'm not even really interested. So that was when did it come out? A few years ago. I don't know. So some time ago it came out. So I'm watching it now. I saw, you know what? I'm going to see the rest of it. I like O'Malley's art, and I want to just kind of see how this plays out and everything. In full disclosure, I was on I was bored, and kind of hung up in a hospital setting. Let's give you that. So I'm like, I need something to watch. Went through Lockwood and Co., which I quite enjoyed. And then went on to Scott Pilgrim. So anyway, as I'm watching it, and actually I'm just watching the episodes, letting them kind of wash over me, I find myself going, a lot of that criticism about the show that people were writing in blogs and on Twitter and everything else wasn't exactly correct. Like, for example, people are saying, they got rid of the white male so they could let the multicolored bisexual girl boss take the lead in this series. And that's not really true. If you watch the whole series, yes, Ramona's in it. Yes, she's kind of the thread through the whole thing. But really, what the rest of the series does is puts a lot more time on everyone. So, like, everyone is getting a lot more airtime. Ramona is in it, but at times feels a bit like a bit character as opposed to anything else. The other thing is, at the time, there was a lot of articles defending Scott Pilgrim. Like, this is a better version. She can save herself. Well, she's not saving herself, and Scott Pilgrim wasn't saving her either in the original series. He was biting her ex-boyfriends, for comedy. That's all that was. Um, so I mean, there's no like white hero male complex going on in the first place, nor in the remake. But a lot of the comments that were made were along like this allows us to finally set around some wrongs. Like Ramona got to say, a proper goodbye to the girl that she dated in college, kind of experimentally. And I mean, sort of. They made the girl kind of a psychopath, and then she was just horny for everyone. And they fought. And they said, I shouldn't have treated you that way. And then she went on being horny to everybody. So I mean, like, I don't know. Is that a redemption arc? Maybe it was played for gags. But anyway, I watched this series, and at the recording of this video, I still have I think 2 episodes left to go. So we'll see how the big finish winds up. Maybe there will be a big gay parade at the end, but who knows? But in general, I find the show not nearly as offensive as everybody went off on. I don't find it a shot at toxic masculinity or any of that. I find it a clear case of, hey, you thought you knew the show, and hey, we're going to do a twist, and hey, we're going to kind of play with some of these other characters and do different things with them, and it becomes kind of a what if story, and that's all you got. It's like it's a what if story. It's a different version of the events that you thought you knew, and it's more or less fine. Um, I I don't. It's not great, and the other interesting part too, though, is you could tell. I mean, if anything, I think the thing to complain most about this show with is not the, quote unquote, it's got woke in it. Because if you read the original Scott Pilgrim, it had the woke in it too. It like, of the 7 evil ex-boyfriends, one was a girl. It was always the case. There was Wallace, the gay friend of Scott Pilgrim in the original, in the movie, and in the new cartoon. Like, that nothing changed. So it wasn't like they injected more woke into it. I think it had the same woke content before or after. But the big complaint I think I'd have on the show is if you didn't watch the original movie, or you didn't read the original comic, a lot of this new version makes no fucking sense. So it really, this show, as much as it's doing a bold different take on Scott Pilgrim, requires you to have watched or read the original Scott Pilgrim in order to make sense of it. You don't know why characters are exploding into coins, and they never really explain it in the cartoon. You're just meant to know that going in. And the idea that, hey, this is wrong, and there's a different version. I mean, just all the different elements of this show fall apart if you're coming into Scott Pilgrim Takes Off as your first viewing of this series. And that's probably why it didn't do better on Netflix, because a lot of people hadn't watched the Scott Pilgrim movie and they hadn't read the comic. And so they're like, oh, here's a new show and it's got some big names attached to it. Okay, let's watch it. And when you watch it, it actually has major, like, missing elements to the plot, because it completely relies on that past understanding of the comic in order to, as I would say, work. But it's not that it works. It just, the show takes a lot of shortcuts that it can only take because it's leveraging the past. And I think that's its biggest sin, because as a result, it's not a complete, version of anything. It just will forever be a what if alt take on comics. So anyway, that's my crazy thought in all this. So let me know, have you watched this show? Did you watch the Scott Pilgrim's Takes Off? Did you hate it? I know, I have a feeling that this is going to come across just as bait for some of you to go in there like, here's Perch defending the woke show, saying it's great. No, it wasn't great. But it wasn't, it's fine. It was fine. It still is, the show is very flawed. It's just, I don't remember anyone talking about the real flaw of the show, which is, as a what if show, it actually doesn't make a whole lot of sense. There's some interesting things to it. It is interesting to be able to delve more into lives of some of the evil ex-boyfriends. It is interesting to see, Matthew Patel, and more of what he's got going on. I mean, some of that stuff's interesting. I don't know. I'm like, oh, I'm learning more about the characters. I actually find that pretty enjoyable. you know, was other than that, I mean, allowed them to play with some other stuff, and I thought that was interesting, but by and large, you know, I know it does have the nightmare Brie Larson as one of the voices, which maybe is the big problem. But I guess to summarize all this up, um, I think we live in an era now where everything's got to be you know dismantled, discussed, picked apart. That we're on the signs for any signs of the woke virus is infecting us. On the other end, any signs of people complaining have to be attacked as those people are toxic. And actually, the thing they're complaining about is the best thing that has ever existed. They swing it so far in the other direction. And most things are just average. They're middling. And that's kind of what this is. I still like the art. I like the animation. I like that I got more into the characters. I enjoyed that. Um, I didn't like that the story really kind of made no sense. I don't know. I'm just left kind of puzzled by the whole thing. So, what did you think of the Scott Pilgrim show? Do you remember these and more than that, these controversies? I'm struck, and right now I'm really thoughtful about the ones that age well and the ones that people rapidly forget about because just nobody cares. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Feel free, shit all over me here, but the big point was not all controversies are the same. And we're living in a world where there's a high motivation to just have lots of things be controversial all the time. And, half those things don't matter and wind up looking kind of silly years later. Thanks for listening.